A wooden box, roughly 4 feet long, 2 feet wide. It sat inside a tent in the middle of a desert. No army around it, no fortress protecting it, no walls keeping it safe. Just a box. And yet, when the most powerful empire on earth reached out and touched it, they didn't celebrate. They didn't keep it as a trophy. They begged, desperately, urgently, to give it back. The Philistines captured it in battle at a place called Ebenezer. 34,000 Israelite soldiers were already dead that day. The high priest's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, gone before sunset. Israel's enemies thought they had won everything that mattered. Instead, within 24 hours, their god Dagon was found face down on the temple floor. Nobody pushed him. Nobody broke in. He just fell. Within 7 months, 5 cities were hit with plague. People were dying in the streets. And the rulers of those cities, powerful men, military leaders, were holding emergency meetings, terrified out of their minds. All because of a box. By the end of this video, you won't just know what the ark was. You'll understand something deeper, that God's presence cannot be used like a weapon, cannot be tamed like a pet, and cannot be touched carelessly. And that truth is going to challenge how you've been treating your relationship with Him. If you want stories that wake you up and go deep, subscribe right now. We do this every week. The year is around 1050 BC. Israel has been living in the Promised Land for over 200 years, and they have wasted almost every single one of them. The pattern never stops. They obey God. Life gets comfortable. Comfort leads to forgetting. Forgetting leads to chasing other gods. Then their enemies crush them. Then they cry out. Then God rescues them. Then the whole thing starts again. Right now, the Philistines own the coastal land. 5 city-states, Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, have built a military machine that Israel simply cannot match. Iron chariots, trained armies, and a total grip on metalwork, which means Israeli farmers cannot even sharpen their own farming tools without Philistine permission. Israel is behind. Israel is weak. And Israel is spiritually hollow. The priests at Shiloh, the men supposed to lead the nation closer to God, have turned the whole thing rotten from the inside. Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are stealing food from worshippers by force. They are taking advantage of women who serve at the entrance of the tabernacle. And their father, old and nearly blind, knows everything, and does nothing. Something is about to break wide open. Something holy is about to be treated like a weapon. And the damage will last for decades. This story is not really about a man. It's about an object, the most sacred object in all of human history. And the question at the heart of it is simple and sharp. What happens when a nation starts treating God like He is their team mascot? To understand why the loss of the ark was so devastating, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to where this object came from, and what God actually said about it. Moses had not yet come down from Mount Sinai. The mountain was still shaking. Fire and smoke were still rising from the top. And at the base of that mountain, the people of Israel were already melting down their gold jewelry to build a calf to worship. The chaos had already begun. But up on that mountain, before the rebellion, before the tablets were smashed, God was giving Moses something extraordinary, the most detailed building instructions ever recorded for a single physical object. He said, build a box. Acacia wood. 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, inside and out. Add a gold border around the rim. Cast 4 gold rings, 2 on each side. Make 2 carrying poles from acacia wood, cover them in gold and slide them through those rings. On top of the lid, craft 2 cherubim angels, out of hammered gold, wings spread upward, faces turned toward each other, looking down at the center of the lid. Every single detail meant something. Acacia wood doesn't rot in the desert. Pure gold inside and out, not decorated with gold covered in it. And the cherubim facing inward toward what God called the mercy seat, the exact spot where His presence would come down and speak with Moses face to face. Then God said one thing that most people skip right past, a quiet instruction that would become deadly important hundreds of years later. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They shall not be removed. Don't touch it. Don't grab it. Don't carry it with your hands. When the ark moved through the wilderness, God didn't assign just anyone to handle it. He chose one specific family, the Kohathites, a clan from the tribe of Levi, and gave them strict rules. Cover it first with leather and cloth. Then and only then lift the poles onto your shoulders. Do not look at it directly. Do not touch it. Not even once. This was not a piece of furniture. This was not a war trophy or a religious decoration. This was God's dwelling place on earth, the spot where heaven touched the ground, where the living God chose to meet with his people. It was carried by set-apart hands through a world that was not set apart. And that distinction, between what is holy and what is not, was built into every rule surrounding it from day one. The people of Israel knew this once. They knew it deeply. The question that this whole story is building toward is simple. What happened when they forgot? So now you know what the ark was, and what God said about how it should be handled. But knowing the rules is one thing. Seeing what happens when those rules are followed with real faith, that is something else entirely. The ark didn't stay in the wilderness forever. The day came when God moved his people forward, into the land he had promised them for generations. And the very first obstacle standing in their way was the Jordan River. This was not a calm, easy crossing. It was harvest season, which meant the Jordan was at its highest and most dangerous, wide, fast, and flooding over its banks. There was no bridge, no shallow section, no boat large enough for 2 million people, their animals, their children, and everything they owned. By any normal measure, they were stuck. But God gave Joshua an instruction that made no natural sense. Send the priests carrying the ark into the water first. Not after a path opens up. Not once the water goes down. First, step in and then see what God does. That is what faith actually looks like. Not confidence that the path is already clear, but willingness to move before it is. The priests picked up those poles, walked to the edge, and stepped in. And the moment their feet touched the water, something happened upstream. The river stopped. It piled up in a heap miles away near a town called Adam. And the priests stood right there in the middle of the dry riverbed, holding the ark, while every single person, every family, every animal in Israel walked across on dry ground. The ark did not follow the people to safety. The ark stood in the middle of the river and held the space open while the people moved. Joshua built 12 stones on that exact spot as a memorial, so that every generation after would ask, "What do these stones mean?" And the answer would always be, the presence of God stopped a river. Then came Jericho. A massive, fortified city with walls so thick that people had built homes inside them. Walls that had made trained soldiers tremble a generation earlier when 12 spies saw them. And God's battle plan was this: walk around the city once a day for 6 days. 7 priests with ram's horn trumpets, the ark of the Lord behind them, the army following in silence. No ladders. No battering rams. No attack strategy whatsoever. On the 7th day they circled 7 times. The trumpets blew. Joshua told the people to shout. And those walls, solid, ancient, terrifying, fell completely flat. No human army did that. No military genius planned it. The presence of God, carried faithfully and obeyed fully, dismantled one of the strongest fortresses in the region. This is the ark at its fullest power, not grabbed in panic, not dragged into battle as a last resort, but carried with reverence by people who were actually walking with God. And that distinction is going to matter enormously in the chapters ahead. Rivers stopped. Walls collapsed. A nation of 2 million people crossed on dry ground. The ark of God had shown, again and again, what it meant to carry the presence of a holy God into battle when your heart was actually aligned with him. But that was then. By the time we reach 1 Samuel, those victories are old stories, the kind grandparents tell and grandchildren half listen to. Generations have come and gone. The ark now rests at Shiloh inside the tabernacle, exactly where it should be. The sacrifices still happen. The festivals are still observed on schedule. The priests are still at their posts. From the outside, everything looks completely normal. Everything looks like faithfulness. But something has gone deeply, quietly wrong on the inside. Eli is the high priest, the most important religious leader in all of Israel, the man responsible for guarding the ark and keeping the worship of God pure. And his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, serve as priests alongside him. 1 Samuel 2 verse 12 doesn't soften it. They were scoundrels who had no regard for the Lord whatsoever. Here is what they were doing. When Israelites came to offer sacrifices, acts of sincere worship, often at great personal cost, Hophni and Phinehas would send a servant with a large fork while the meat was still cooking. The servant would drive the fork into the pot and take whatever came up. The best cuts. Before the fat had even been burned for God, which was the required first portion. And if anyone dared to object, they were threatened. What was supposed to be a holy moment of giving to God was being hijacked by the very men assigned to lead it. It got worse. These same men were taking advantage of the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle, the most sacred place in Israel. The men who were supposed to protect the house of God were preying on the people inside it. Eli knew. He heard everything. And he did respond, once. He called his sons in and said, "Why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. "No, my sons, the report I hear spreading among the Lord's people is not good." That was it. A quiet, sad conversation. No removal from duty. No consequences. Just words and then silence. Think about what that means. The most powerful man in Israel's religious life, the guardian of the ark, chose to keep the peace with his own children rather than obey God. He saw the sin clearly. He named it. And then he let it continue. That is the shape of so much spiritual failure, not a sudden dramatic collapse but a quiet choice, made once and then again to avoid the hard thing. A small compromise. A soft line where a firm one was needed. A father who loved his sons more than he feared the Lord. It seems so minor compared to what is coming. But this is exactly where the catastrophe begins. God did not stay silent. When a small compromise goes uncorrected, when a clear sin is seen and ignored, when a leader chooses comfort over obedience, God does not simply move on. He warns. And in Eli's case, he warned not once but twice through two completely different messengers. That detail matters. God was being more than fair. First, an unnamed man of God walked up to Eli and delivered a message with no softening at all. The priesthood that had been given to Eli's family, that sacred generational honor, was going to be taken away. Both of his sons would die on the same day. Not one of them. Both. On the same day. And a new priest would rise in their place, one who actually did what God required. Eli heard every word, and did nothing. Then God came to the boy Samuel, a child who was sleeping in the tabernacle, who barely knew God's voice yet. 3 times in a single night God called his name. 3 times Samuel woke up and ran to Eli thinking the old priest had called him. On the 3rd time, Eli finally understood what was happening and told Samuel to go back and listen. So God spoke, and gave Samuel the same message he had already given Eli, word for word. The next morning Eli asked Samuel what God had said. Samuel was afraid to tell him. This was a hard word, delivered to a child, about the man standing right in front of him. But Eli pressed him and Samuel told him everything. Eli's response to hearing his family's full judgment for the 2nd time was this: "He is the Lord, let him do what is good in his eyes." That sounds humble. It sounds like the answer of a man who has surrendered everything to God. But here is what makes it hollow. The very next day Hophni and Phinehas were still priests. Still serving. Still stealing. Still doing exactly what had brought the judgment in the first place. Eli's words sounded like faith, but his actions were still silence. Then came war. The Philistines attacked and Israel marched out to meet them at Aphek. 4,000 soldiers died in the first clash alone. The elders gathered to make sense of it, but notice what they did not do. They did not pray. They did not ask God why he had allowed this or whether he wanted them fighting at all. Instead they made a decision entirely on their own: go get the ark from Shiloh. Bring it here. If we have the ark in our camp, God has to fight for us. They sent for it. Hophni and Phinehas carried it in personally. When it arrived, the entire Israelite army erupted with a shout so loud the ground shook. The Philistines heard it across the battlefield, found out what it meant, and were genuinely terrified, for a moment. Then one commander stood up and said, "Be strong, fight like men, or we'll end up their servants." They steadied themselves. They tightened their grip. And they charged. They charged. And Israel broke. 30,000 soldiers died that day. Not 4,000, that was the first battle. 30,000 more in the second. In a single afternoon, the army of Israel was crushed so completely that the number is almost hard to absorb. 30,000 men. Gone. And in the middle of that catastrophe, exactly what God had said would happen, happened. Hophni was killed. Phinehas was killed. Both sons. Same day. Not wounded, not captured. Dead. Every word of that prophecy, the one Eli had heard and nodded at and done nothing about, came true before the sun went down. And the ark of God was captured. A runner left the battlefield. He tore his clothes, the ancient sign of total devastation, of grief too large for words. He put dust on his head and ran all the way back to Shiloh. When he arrived, the city heard him before they saw him. They started screaming. That sound traveled through the streets and reached an old man sitting beside the road. Eli was 98 years old. Nearly blind. He had been sitting there the whole time, waiting and trembling, because his heart was afraid for the Arkansas. Not for his sons, for the Arkansas. Even in his weakness, even in all his failure, that much was still in him. He heard the screaming and asked what had happened. The runner told him everything. His sons were dead. Israel had fled. And the ark of God, had been taken. When the man said those words, Eli fell backward off his chair. He was old and heavy. He hit the ground, broke his neck, and died. At that same moment, across the city, Phinehas's wife was in labor. She was close to delivering when the news reached her. Her husband was dead, her father-in-law was dead, and the ark was gone. The shock sent her into hard labor. The women around her tried to comfort her, telling her she had given birth to a son. She did not respond to that news. She did not ask about the baby. She was focused on something else entirely. With her last breath, she named her son Ichabod. In Hebrew it means, the glory has departed. And then she explained why she chose it, not because of her husband, not because of Eli, but because the ark of God had been captured. Even in dying, this woman understood something more clearly than the elders who had made the decision to drag the ark into battle. She knew what had actually been lost that day. Not a battle. Not two priests. Not a high priest. The glory. The presence of God, gone from Israel, carried away in the hands of their enemies. The ark is gone. The priests are dead. The high priest is dead. Israel has nothing. And a baby named No Glory cries in a dead woman's arms. But the story is not over. Because God was not finished. While Israel sat in silence and grief, God went to work. The Philistines carried the ark into their territory feeling like winners. They had defeated Israel's army. They had taken Israel's most sacred object. In their minds, this was proof of something very important, that their god, Dagon, was more powerful than the God of Israel. So they did exactly what a conquering nation would do with a captured trophy. They brought the ark to Ashdod, carried it into the temple of Dagon, and set it down right beside their god. A statement. A declaration. Our God beat your God. That night the temple doors were shut. Everything was still. The next morning the priests of Dagon walked in to find their god face down on the floor, lying flat before the ark. They looked at each other. They picked Dagon up and set him back in his place. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking it. The morning after that they walked in again. Dagon was face down again, but this time something was different. His head and both his hands had been broken clean off. They were lying on the threshold at the entrance to the temple. The body of the statue was still standing, but everything that represented power and authority, the head that thinks, the hands that act, had been severed and placed at the door like a message. God had not sent an army. He had not sent a prophet. He had simply been present. And his presence alone had dismantled the most powerful god in Philistine religion, twice in the dark with no one watching. Then the plague started. Tumors broke out all across the city of Ashdod, painful, spreading, deadly. People began dying. Panic took over. The leaders of Ashdod called an emergency meeting and made a fast decision. Send the ark to Gath, one of the other 4 Philistine cities. Let it be their problem. The ark arrived in Gath. The tumors followed. More panic, more death. Send it to Ekron. When the cart carrying the ark was spotted approaching Ekron, the people of that city did not celebrate. They screamed. They cried out that the God of Israel had been sent to destroy them. Plague hit Ekron too. People were dying in the streets. 7 months passed. 5 cities. Every single one suffering. And not one of them, not one ruler, not one army, not one priest, could make it stop. Finally, the Philistine rulers gathered together and consulted their wisest men. The answer was unanimous: send it back. But send it back with a guilt offering, 5 gold figures shaped like tumors and 5 gold rats, one set for each city that had suffered. Then load it on a new cart, hitch 2 cows that had never been used before and had just given birth to calves, and let the cows go free without being guided. If they walked straight toward Israel on their own, leaving their newborn calves behind, then everyone would know. The God of Israel had done all of this. The cows walked straight. They did not turn. They did not look back. They moved directly toward the nearest Israelite town, lowing as they went, grieving as any mother animal would, but never stopping. Not once. The ark was going home. Not because Israel had earned it. Not because anyone had prayed for it or fought for it. Because no power on earth can hold God's glory against his will. The cows walked straight into Israelite territory and stopped at a large rock in a field near the town of Beth Shemesh. The men of that town were out harvesting wheat when they looked up and saw the cart approaching. When they recognized what was on it, they erupted with joy. After 7 months of silence, after the grief and the shame and the loss, the ark of God was back on Israelite soil. They acted immediately. They split apart the wood of the cart and used it to build a fire. They sacrificed the 2 cows right there as a burnt offering to God. The Levites present carefully lowered the ark and placed it on the large rock. People brought more offerings. The celebration was genuine, spontaneous, and full. This was not a religious ceremony. This was a community overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. And then, in the middle of all that joy, 70 men walked over and looked inside the ark. The scripture records it plainly: God struck them down. 70 people dead at the very moment of restoration, on the very day the ark came home. This is the part of the story that most people want to skip past. It feels harsh. It feels like the wrong ending to what should have been a purely joyful moment. But it is not separate from the story, it is the final, unmistakable statement of the whole story. The holiness of God is not seasonal. It does not take a day off because the mood is festive. It does not soften because Israel had already suffered enough. The rules about the ark were not suggestions for difficult days only. They were permanent. And they applied equally to enemies and to God's own people, to ordinary days and to days of celebration. The men of Beth Shemesh understood this immediately. Their response was not anger, it was fear. They cried out, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God?" They knew they could not keep the ark there. They sent word to the people of Kiriath Jearim, a town on a hill nearby. "Come and take it." And the people of Kiriath Jearim came. They brought the ark to the home of a man named Abinadab on the top of the hill. His son Eleazar was set apart specifically to watch over it. And there the ark stayed, in a private home, not a temple, not a palace, guarded by one consecrated man, while all of Israel entered a long, painful season of mourning and seeking God. 20 years passed. Then Samuel stood before the nation and issued one of the clearest calls to repentance in all of Scripture. He said, "If you are returning to God with your whole heart, then remove every false god from your life and commit yourself to Him completely. Not partially. Not mostly. Completely." They obeyed. Every foreign god was removed. Every divided loyalty was surrendered. And when the Philistines came to fight Israel again, God thundered from heaven with such power that the enemy was completely routed, not by Israel's army, not by any military strategy, but by the sheer force of God fighting for a people whose hearts finally belonged entirely to Him. Israel did not win back the Arkansas. They won back the presence of God. And that, not the object, not the gold, not the cherubim, but the presence of God, which was always the only thing that ever actually mattered. So what do we do with all of this? This story is not just ancient history. It is a mirror. And every person in it, Eli, the army of Israel, the Philistines, Eleazar, reflects something that is still happening in people's lives today. The question is, which one reflects yours? Look at Eli. Here was a man who knew the truth, heard it clearly, and chose silence anyway. Not because he disagreed with God. Not because he doubted the warnings. But because the honest thing, the obedient thing, would have cost him something close to his heart. His relationship with his sons. So he said the right words and took no real action. And what looked like patience slowly turned into compromise, and what looked like love for his sons slowly became the thing that destroyed them. God warned him twice, through two separate messengers in two completely different ways. Eli heard both and did nothing. The moment he said, "He is the Lord, let him do what he sees fit," while still doing nothing, that was the moment his story became a tragedy. So here is the honest question. What has God shown you clearly? And finally, look at Eleazar. One man. One hill. One assignment. No spotlight, no crowd, no recognition. Just 20 years of quiet faithfulness while the rest of the nation processed its grief and slowly found its way back to God. Not every calling looks like a battlefield. Some callings look like showing up, day after day, to the same unglamorous post, more than once, that you have acknowledged with your mouth and ignored with your life. Because the gap between what you know and what you do, that gap has a name. And it has consequences. Now look at the army of Israel. They did not go into battle having lost their faith. They went in with the most sacred object in existence on their shoulders, shouting loud enough to shake the ground. They were confident. They were loud. They were carrying God's name. And they lost everything. What? Because they had not talked to God. They had not repented. They had not asked what He wanted. They had made their decision and then brought His presence along to guarantee the result. That is not faith. That is using God as a stamp of approval. And it cost 30,000 lives. Think carefully about that the next time you pray at the end of a plan you've already made, asking God to bless something you never asked Him about in the first place. Then look at the Philistines. All their military strength, all their cultural power, all their gods. None of it could contain what they had taken. Dagon fell. Their cities broke out in sickness. They could not manage the presence of God because they did not belong to God. There is no structure, no system, no personal wisdom that can put God in a box and keep Him comfortable. If you have been trying to fit God into your existing routines rather than reorganizing your life around Him, This is the part of the story that speaks directly to you. Until the season changes and the next chapter begins. What has God asked you to guard or carry faithfully without applause while you wait? Here is the challenge, and it is for today, not someday. Identify one area where you have been managing God's presence rather than submitting to it. Write it down. Say it out loud. Lay it down. That is where restoration begins. Not with a dramatic gesture. With one honest, quiet act of consecration. If this story moved you, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which story from Scripture do you want us to go deep on next? And share this with someone who needs to hear that God's glory cannot be captured, cannot be contained, and will not stay silent. Remain ever blessed.